Hi guys, it's Olivia here from Olivia's Catastrophe, and today I'm here to give you my May reading wrap-up. In the month of May I read 17 books and I'm here to tell you all about them. I participated in Believathon, which is hosted by How to Train Your Gavin. I also participated in Books for the Brave, which was to contribute funds to the NHS, and that was hosted by 3 people, I believe, Drinking by My Shelf and also Victoria Reads. And I also tried to do Mental Health-a-thon, only read 1 book for Mental Health-a-thon, and I'll talk about that and my experience with Mental Health-a-thon when I get around to talking about those books. Let's get right into it. So the first book I want to start with is Black Activist Poetry, and that is Say Her Name by Zetta Elliott, and I really recommend this one if you want to read some poems that are going to make you really think about and evaluate your perspective on the Black Lives Matter movement. This poetry collection was just okay for me. I feel like poetry is something that is very personal to every reader, and it's not particularly my type of poetry. I feel like if you like Insta poetry but you like a bit more from your Instagram poetry, you are going to enjoy this one, and I know that's what's really popular at the moment. So if you like that kind of poetry that's not too difficult to understand, that's fairly straightforward, and you get the subject matter, you're going to like this poetry collection. And I don't really have much more to say other than it's intersectional, there's beautiful illustrations in this one, and it's such a good read to read right now. The next one I have to talk about is a manga, and that is Death Note Volume 1 and 2. They're both in this black edition, and I had a blast reading this. I was looking for something that was easy to read, lots of pictures, and manga just brings that to the table. I already knew what was going to happen because I have watched the entire anime for Death Note, but this is my first time reading the manga and it was really good. So what happens in this manga is there's these gods of death, and they have these notebooks, and if you write a name in this notebook, that person will die, and you can also say how they die and there's more nuance to it, which you can find out about when you read the book. And this death god drops it down to earth, and a human picks it up, and he decides he's going to start creating justice by killing off all the criminals that he possibly can. So this one is a book that really brings to the forefront the moral of the death row, and also what criminals deserve, what they don't deserve. Are you doing good by killing off criminals, or are you just doing bad as well? But at the same time, it's quite a psychological thriller because the police are after trying to find out who's instigating all of this, and you get this kind of it's not a murder mystery, but like hunting down a criminal, but at the same time, is the criminal doing the right thing? It's asking a lot of moral questions, and it's just so exciting and interesting. I think Volume 1 does a very good job of setting up the story, but Volume 2 is when the story really gets going and gets exciting, and it introduces my favourite character in Volume 2. I do think that the female representation is quite lacking in this one. There are some sexist comments and kind of sexist situations. I'm glad that there's not too many female characters in it, just because then there's not many opportunities for this, but do be aware that you're going to get this when you read it. Also, it's something I should know, as there are quite a few new people here, I always leave content warnings in the description box below, so do check it out, because I won't always mention that this book has a particular content warning, but it will be down below. I did 2 buddy reads with Guy Athena last month, and we read Artemis Fowl by Owen Colfer, and also Artemis Fowl and the Arctic Incident, which is the second book, and I'll tell you what the first book is about. So we follow Artemis Fowl, who is this young boy. Artemis Fowl is 12 years old and he's a criminal mastermind. His mother is not really present and his father has gone missing, and so he's the one who's left to run the criminal enterprise that his family is in, and he's discovered that there are fairies, and fairies in this world have this gold which you can get if you ransom a fairy. So Artemis Fowl has this brilliant idea that he's going to capture a fairy and demand that ransom, get all the money, and yeah. But to do so, it's not going to be that easy because fairies have a lot of magic and a lot of tricks up their sleeve. I really enjoyed reading this series. I want to talk about the first one mostly because that's the one that instantly gripped me. I felt like it was exciting, I felt like it was fun. It's essentially a heist story, so if you do like heist stories, you're going to enjoy it. I would put this as a middle grade series. I remember reading the first one when I was younger, but I totally remembered nothing, so I'm gonna say it's middle grade. And Artemis is the mind behind everything, and then he's got this butler who is his bodyguard, who's kind of the brawn, and it's such a great dynamic that those two have because they're almost like family friends but also employee boss, so it's just very interesting. I thought the magic was done really well and I loved hearing about the fairies. The world building is fantastic, and even though this is like a magical actiony high story, they still managed to slip in a lot of discussions about environment, seeing as the fairies hate how humans aren't very caring about the environment. So it's just got some very good morals also just hidden underneath, so definitely a very good one. And then I read the second one, which I won't tell you about seeing as I gave a synopsis for the first, but it was still good. It wasn't as good as the first one, but I still enjoyed them to an equal degree and gave them both the same rating. And yeah, in this one a lot more is done about working with people who are your enemies, so if you want the kind of enemies to co-workers vibe, that's what you're going to get here. And I also really appreciated that in this one there's two plot lines running at the same time, but they kind of connect, and I really enjoy when you've got two separate plot lines but they connect. I didn't realise how much I enjoyed that, and I appreciate seeing that in a middle grade series because it's showing that the author thinks that children are intelligent enough to keep up with the story, which, you know, they are. Children are so intelligent. I do feel like the characters were a little bit more 2D, seeing as there was a larger range of characters to follow. This series was so much fun and I wasn't having the best time in May, so I needed fun reads and this just provided it for me. Next we're going to talk about the end of the Chronicles of Narnia. I started reading this series last month and I read most of them, so if you want to hear more about that, go to my wrap up. I'll leave links in the description box down below. But this month I read The Magician's Nephew and The Last Battle and finished off the series. It was not good. I read these both for Believathon, and let's talk about The Last Battle first. So this is the last one in the Chronicles of Narnia, so I'm not going to tell you too much about what the series is about, but if you don't know the films or you don't know these books, it's about these 4 children who go to an estate and there's a wardrobe and they go through the wardrobe and they end up in Narnia, which is this lovely magical world. The world was not so lovely in this one. I rated this book 1 star because this book is incredibly racist. I'm now going to talk about racism in this book. So how is this book racist? For people who don't see the racism in this book or have missed it, I would like to say that you've got a monkey who is masquerading as a man, which is a racist trope that happens quite a lot in classics. It is in the Jungle Book too. Yeah, the song Be Like You, that's a really racist song. So we've got a monkey who's masquerading as a man and he's also the villain in this one, so that's just one way. Also, the Calormen are all the villains in this book. They're like an army of evil people essentially in Narnia. All of them are black people, and the book starts by describing them as Calormen, but then towards the end they just call them darkies, and they just outright call them darkies the whole time. And there's other elements of racism, such as the children need a disguise, so they use this potion which makes their skin darker, and the whole time that's happening they're like, oh yay, disguises, and they seem to be enjoying themselves, which just doesn't make any sense, because if you hate dark skin so much, why are you putting it on and having a laugh? That's not entertaining to read. And while they've got this disguise on, the author's still talking about how pale the children look, so that just doesn't add up even. Anyway, I could go on and on about how racist this book was, but it was really, really problematic. And the problem with me seeing racism in this, well, there's always a problem with me seeing racism in books, but if you can't tell from the cross, I am a Christian, and Narnia goes very heavy on the Christian imagery. It's heavy-handed, but if you're not a Christian or you're not really aware of the Christian faith, sometimes people don't see it at all, so you can read these books and miss the Christian imagery. However, to me it was very, very obvious, especially at the end of the book. It's very explicit in its Christian themes, and seeing the Christian themes running along the racism just made my blood boil. And then at the end they also mentioned this one character. I'm not going to spoil anything, but they are quite misogynistic with the way that they describe this character. It's very sexist how they stereotype this character, and they don't take a single minute to think about the implications of the ending on this particular character. And once you think about those implications, you realise that this ending is not what the ending seems. I was really mad reading this book. And then I read The Magician's Nephew, and I was boiling with anger while reading The Magician's Nephew. Did it impact my opinion of this book? Probably. Do I care that it did? No. I did rate this one higher. It didn't get 1 star, but I did find it very, very boring. Not much happens throughout the whole of it. I can appreciate the Adam and Eve allusions. I can appreciate that it kind of gender flipped Adam and Eve. That was nice to see, but there's a lot of sexism in this book as well. Polly is the main female character, and I feel like Diggory, who is the other character is mean to Polly throughout the whole thing and doesn't properly apologise, doesn't properly get called out for it, and he kind of gets his happily ever after and Polly is just a side character that just kind of... It just really bothered me how Polly was treated by literally everyone, and then the other female character is evil. So I just was not very happy with the sexism in this book, found it a bit boring. There's a flying horse, that is great, it was not enough. Shall we talk about my 5-star reads this month? I feel like after that I need to talk about my 5-star reads. Again, for Believathon there was a prompt about reading a book with a disabled character, so I reread Out of My Mind by Sharon M. Draper. Out of My Mind follows Melody. Melody is a wheelchair user and she has cerebral palsy. She cannot control a lot of her limbs, she cannot speak at all, and she lives her life trapped in her mind. She's incredibly intelligent, a photographic memory, and she has so much to say, but because of her disability she cannot physically say it. In this book, something is discovered for her which will enable her to speak for the first time using a machine, and this is what happens when Melody, after 11 years of her life, finally gets a voice. This book was a new favourite for me. 5 stars. I remembered most of it, but you know what? I didn't even care. It is very emotional, so be ready to be hit hard by emotions, be in a good headspace. I am not an own voices reviewer for this book, but I do live with my younger sister who is disabled and she's a wheelchair user, and from the perspective of someone who has cared for someone who is a wheelchair user, not someone who has cerebral palsy, because my sister doesn't have cerebral palsy, but the experiences that Melody has as a wheelchair user are very, very authentic. My younger sister has read this book before and also would like to say that they are authentic, so if you want some good representation, this is a really good one to read. And it really explores the education system and how it treats disabled people. It explores friendship, and I think that these are the best parents in literature, hands down, that I've ever read. I really love the parents. I love how it shows that they are imperfect. I love how it shows that they are perfect at the same time. I can't tell you about the main plot in this one or one of the main issues that it tackles, but that issue, that has happened time and time again to my younger sister, and it's rubbish. It's the worst, the actual worst. So please read this book, learn from it. The next book I want to talk about was another 5-star read for me and a new favourite, and that is My Heart and Other Black Holes by Jasmine Warger. This book is going to come with some content warnings, and the main one is suicide. I am going to talk about suicide while I talk about this book, so if you want to skip over until I show the next book on the screen, please do so, and there's also some other content warnings down below. Let's start talking about it. 2 main characters, one is Roman and the other one is Azel, and they are 2 teenagers who both want to commit suicide, and they go onto this website where you can find a suicide partner so you don't have to do it alone and you're more likely to take the leap and commit suicide. And it follows these characters meeting, planning how they're going to do this, and I can't really tell you more than that. It is a very emotionally heavy book. I read this book for Mental Healthathon. I knew what the subject matter was, but when it hit me quite hard, and then I knew that with the whole situation going on in the pandemic, I was not actually in the right headspace to read any books about mental health this month, so I had to stop my mental health journey, my Mental Healthathon journey there, and the hosts have already said if anything's impacting your mental health, don't do the readathon, just protect yourself. So I decided to go that route. However, I do want to highlight this one because it is absolutely fantastic. It really does delve in deep into the topic of suicide. I appreciate that it breaks down stereotypes around suicide. Azel, who follows what people tend to say are the stereotypes, she doesn't smile, she's very depressed, she only wears black. Those are some stereotypes that people have around people who are suicidal, and while she does show those, there's a lot more depth to her story and the reasons why she is suicidal and feels unloved and unwanted. And then we've got Roman, who is this very popular jock, and he also is struggling with grief and is suicidal, and he kind of unpacks some of the stereotypes, and they do discuss these things when they meet each other. Both of these characters develop so much and go on such a journey, and I really appreciate how we got to see their families as well on either side. It was just a really phenomenal, well-written, very thought-provoking book. I do urge you to read the author's note at the end, and do check out the content warnings because there's more than just the suicide in this one. I have to talk about Fortune Cookie by Kathy Cassidy, and I read this for Believathon again. It's the end of the Chocolate Box Girls series. I adore that series. It's one of my favourite series of all time, and I want to point you towards my last month wrap up where I talk about all 5 books in the series. So in this one, I can't really tell you much because it's the end of the series, but in the first book we follow these 2 families, and one of them is a mother who has a lot of daughters, and then we've got Paddy and Cherry, and they are 2 separate families who are going to come together and become one, because in Tanglewood the mother was divorced and she's fallen for Paddy, so they are moving in together, and Cherry's going to join the family, have some new stepsisters, and it's about the families coming together, and we follow each of the sisters as they have their story. It's kind of a middle grade slash young adult series because we start with the youngest sibling and then go up to the older sibling. Can't even tell you which character it follows because that is all a plot twist. But what I can tell you is that it's still a very good book. It's the perfect conclusion to the series. It was so bittersweet reading it because it was just the best way that Kathy Cassidy could have possibly ended the series. It's the shortest book in the series, so I did wish she took her time a bit more and spent more time with the characters. I would have liked if it was a bit slower and things weren't so rushed, but it does unpack a lot of really important topics, again, that I can't tell you anything about, and it was so good to just check in with all of these characters again. It made my heart so warm, it made my heart so happy. This is the kind of fiction I need in my life. Then I did a buddy read with Abby from Abby Mac Reads. I'm going to link her Instagram because she's very active over there at the moment, and reread Horrorstor by Grady Hendrix. Grady Hendrix writes my favourite horrors that I've read so far yet, and in this one it's brilliant because we are set in a IKEA-like shop. It's a spin-off of IKEA, and there's these co-workers who go there, and weird things are happening in the furniture shop overnight. The furniture is trashed and ruined, and the owner has had enough of it and wants to know who it is, so he asks a few other co-workers of his to stay after hours in the shop, and they are going to see who it is that's doing things, and it ends up being a bit paranormal and very horror, hence the title Horrorstor. Reading this one is so fun because this book is set up to look like an IKEA catalogue. So I'm just trying to show you a little bit. There's some like IKEA catalogue-y things, and it has some like unique pages and everything. So the book and the format really does contribute to the overall story. And in the beginning, it got off to a bit of a slow start. I wasn't really feeling our main character. She's quite unlikable, but by the end of it, I was so here for it. Amy really develops over the course of the novel, and that development is very painful for her because she's in Horrorstor and some horror stuff is happening. Some really creepy and disturbing stuff is going to happen in this book. I'm putting content warnings down below. So if you do like really disturbing horror, you're gonna like this one. But even though it's showing all of these typical horror things and the characters go on this development journey along the way, the real horror in this one is not the paranormal, terrifying thing that's happening. It says a lot about capitalism and the industry and selling stuff to people because it is set in this shop. And I love when your horror just digs deeper than a scare and a thrill. It goes into some social commentary, and I did not expect that from this novel, and Grady Hendrix just brought it to the table again. I also think that the horror genre sometimes gets bad rep for having female characters written badly. It gets bad rep because there's characters written badly in the horror genre. However, Grady Hendrix writes Amy so well, so you don't have to worry about that. Then I read a play, and that is Rosencrantz and Guildenstern by Tom Stoppard. I was so excited to read this one because I love Hamlet and I love Shakespeare, so it was great to read this play. If you like Waiting for Godot by Samuel Beckett, or any of Samuel Beckett's plays really, where they're quite... the humour is very peculiar, they're quite nihilistic at times, existential, and that's what these plays kind of are, but it's so creative because you're following Rosencrantz and Guildenstern behind the scenes of the play. So the play of Hamlet is happening off screen, you can't see it in the play, but they're waiting in the wings for when they have to go on, and it's so meta and it's so deep at the same time. And I feel like the themes in this one are waiting for something to happen that you don't know if it's going to happen, or like what's the point in life, and it's quite repetitive sometimes, but that's part of the play, that's part of the depth to it. And I like how it showed scenes of Hamlet that had to have happened for the play of Hamlet to happen, but had to have happened not in the play, so those scenes reference it, but you don't get to see it happening. You get to see it happening in this play. And Tom Stoppard changes his writing metric depending on if we're talking about the play, then it's in like Shakespearean metric of Hamlet, and then if we're not, then it changes. There's just so many finer details to this one. It was so fun to read. I read it in a single day and I loved every second. The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger, and this is a classic that follows this 17-year-old boy, and this 17-year-old boy is going through a crisis. I feel like he's quite depressed, but it doesn't say that. He is kind of having an existential crisis as well. And in the beginning of this novel, I really didn't like it. The writing style is not my cup of tea. It's very conversationalist, and I didn't like his character. His character is very unlikable, especially in the beginning. However, I just kept reading because I needed something to help me get through a difficult weekend, and the second half of the book is just so much better, but still it wasn't good. It just made me see things in a different point, and I feel like this book, it doesn't really go anywhere. I don't know what the point of this book was, but at the same time I think I get it, because even though he's an unlikable character, you can see that he does likable things underneath it all, but he's still unlikable, and you can see that he's really actually struggling with his mental health, but he doesn't know it and he doesn't acknowledge it. So it was one of those books that make me scratch my head, and I probably need to think about it and process it a lot more. There is quite a lot of sexist comments in it, but then at the same time he does things that are so the opposite of that. I'm confused, but I understand. Continuing on with the classics that I read for class, I read The Happy Prince and Other Tales by Oscar Wilde, and this is a collection of his fairy tales. I really, really enjoyed this because unlike some of the other fairy tale authors that we know, he didn't retell, okay, I'm just throwing shade at the Brothers Grimm here, he didn't retell other fairy tales, he made his own, and they're very unique, and the moral stories in them are quite, you have to think and really look for them. They're not so obvious as they are in other fairy tales, and I really did appreciate that. They're quite dark at times, a lot to do with death, but a lot to do with kindness, with greed, with capitalism, like the rich and the poor, a lot to do with happiness and where true fulfillment can be found, some to do with selfishness, and a lot to do with trust in relationships and in friendships, which I just found so interesting to see in a fairy tale, like this shift of where the focus lies, and I thought they were really well written, really enjoyable to read, and I enjoyed it. I read through the whole thing in a single day. Then I read 3 Shakespeare plays because that's just how it has to be. The first one that I read was Much Ado About Nothing, and in this one it had to do with a couple who were getting married and some scandal happens around the marriage. At the same time, there are these 2 people who really don't like each other, they tend to sass each other, and they decide they're going to matchmake those 2 couples and kind of mess with them and get them to fall in love. So you've got a bit of a side story, which is enemies to lovers, and then you've also got the main story, which is this romantic drama to do with a wedding. And this is one of Shakespeare's comedies that I really did enjoy. I usually struggle with his comedies, but I did find this one entertaining. I loved the sass that the 2 side characters get into all the time, and while there is some issues with the female character not getting much of a voice when it came to the whole falling in love wedding situation and everything afterwards, literally no one ever listens to her. That was frustrating, but other than that, it was a very funny, enjoyable Shakespeare play, and I think it was written really well and it was good. I then moved on to Lovelabor's Lost, and this one follows this group of men who decide they're going to dedicate themselves to study, they're not going to have any woman on the estate, and they're not going to fall in love. However, at the same time, a princess arrives with all of her subjects, and she is not allowed onto the estate where she expected to be welcomed, so she kind of has to camp outside instead, and they are basically, the men just can't stick to their oath and they keep getting interested in the woman, and they're trying to keep it secret from the other men so they don't realize that they're all breaking their oaths. It gets tangled up. I think it's supposed to be a comedy, but at the same time there were these 2 side characters who were talking about education. I did not care about those 2 comedic side characters. I did not find it funny. I found the writing very convoluted and just so technical, but it didn't need to be. I get what Shakespeare was trying to do, seeing as one of the themes of this play is education versus love. He's trying to show that these comedy characters are speaking with this educated language that's just above everybody else, but it's just extremely overly done. I get it, but I didn't enjoy it. I didn't find that entertaining, and then the main storyline with the woman and the love, it just fell a little bit flat for me. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't good either, and the ending kind of just ends on this big cliffhanger. It feels very incomplete, and there is evidence that there was likely a second play called Love's Labours 1 or something like that. However, that is one of Shakespeare's lost plays. We don't have it. We don't have the script to it, which means that if this is a two-part thing, we just only have the first part. And I did bear that in mind, but at the same time, it just wasn't really it for me. Last but not least, I read his play called The Two Gentlemen of Verona, and in this one we have Valentine, and he goes off to serve this king and ends up falling in love with her daughter, and her daughter is kept away from men, generally speaking, because the king plans to marry her off to this person who she's not in love with. And Valentine has this best friend called Pedro, and Pedro is in love with Julia, who's back in Verona. However, he gets forced to follow Valentine, and when he follows Valentine, he forgets all about Julia and falls in love with the same girl. So this is basically romantic drama in a Shakespeare play, and it was entertaining, but at the same time it just got a little bit crazy at the end. So I was loving it all the way through. I loved how Pedro was betraying his best friend, and he was so smart about the way that he betrayed his best friend. I love when a villain is actually smart, and in this one you definitely see that happening. I did love how Sylvia, the person that they both fall in love with, was really on it with rejecting men. She was having none of it. She wasn't interested in a man. She was going to tell them she wasn't interested, and I very much appreciated that. However, the ending has a lot going on. There is Pedro, who was a villain I was digging until he just did something a little bit too villainous, and I was like, back it up, back it up. I don't support you anymore. And then they tried to reconcile everything much too quickly. It kind of ended up with Sylvia not really having much of a say or getting much opinion there at the end, even though she'd had such a strong opinion all the way through. At the end it was just like, by the way, you're not gonna have a voice. So I do think that's going to be very interesting to study and break down. Not like I have classes on Shakespeare anymore, because that was my last year module, but looking into it, I think it's a very interesting one to study, and it was very enjoyable to read, but I just wish the ending wasn't what the ending was. But you gotta take it or leave it. Shakespeare is not going to rewrite his plays for me. And there you have it. Those are the 17 books that I read in the month. I did say that I was going to flick through Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire Illustrated Edition, which I did do. I did flick through it, and I didn't feel any certain type of way. Would I have liked Harry Potter more if I read them via illustrated version? Maybe. I did appreciate that Jim Kay decided to take the matter into his own hands in terms of diversity, and in the illustrations of Hogwarts you do get to see some black people and some diverse people. I did like seeing those drawings, which is not there in the text itself. However, I still don't like Harry Potter. It's just not a series for me. It's never going to be. I did say I was going to give this one away on Instagram when I reached 3,000 followers. I have reached 2,000 followers in light of everything happening right now and how people are trying to support black creators. Don't feel comfortable doing a giveaway for a J.K. Rowling book at the moment. I'm still kind of angry at her, and so I don't really want to give away her book right now, and I will give it away eventually on my Instagram, but I feel like there's more important things that I can be highlighting in my stories and on my feed rather than a giveaway for a J.K. Rowling book. So just stick around, it will happen over there, just not at the moment. And there you have it. That's all I have for my wrap up. Please let me know in the comment section down below what was your favourite read in the month of May. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Please give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Hit the subscribe button if you want to see more. And don't forget to hit that notification bell to be updated every time I have a new video. And you know what they say, onwards and upwards. Excelsior. This is just gonna happen every video.